Hey geeks, welcome to another exciting episode of Rockin The Code World with dotNetDave. I'm David McCarter. I'm glad you're all here. And I look really different today because my internet isn't working. So for the very first time in 85 shows, I've got to do the show for my phone. So I apologize for any video issues or audio. I hope you all can hear me okay. Um, but the show must go on, and so here we are. And I'm not sure if we're going to be able to show the slide deck because Simon's in a hotel and he can't download my slide deck because, hotel Wi-Fi is usually pretty crappy, and especially in India. So we'll see if the slides work. If not, I'll just have to talk through the slides, and then we'll spend most of the time with Arthur. So. Do you want to switch? Well, you don't have the do you have the? Let's see if it's working now. Is it working? There we go. Awesome. So Arthur Doler is my guest today. I'm really glad he's back on the show. This is his second time being on the show, so I'm super excited about that, especially since we're going to be talking about mental health at work, and something I think that we all need to think about. And I was thinking about this morning while I was trying to get all of this working out and kind of stressing out a bit. And I was thinking that, at least for me, because I work at home most of the time, mental health at work, I think working at home allows me, it makes that better for me, I think, just because I'm just not around all that stuff all day. And I can concentrate better and everything. So for me, dealing with mental health at work. Not saying that, you still don't have mental health issues working remotely either. That's a whole nother set of can of worms, if you ask me. But at least some of the stress can be taken out just by not going to work and working at home. At least that's my opinion. And everybody's got their own opinion. So um, anyway, so I'm excited about talking to Arthur about that. Next week, I have my guest. I'll talk more about it at the end of the show. We're going to be talking about imposter syndrome, which is something that a lot of software engineers deal with. So um, make sure you come back next week, and so we can talk about that. All right, so let's go to the next slide. Someone's already done that for me. So I want to announce my brand new OSS libraries and NuGet packages are out this week as of Tuesday, I think. And I think this is the 11th version. I can't remember off the top of my head. And Spargin is basically all the common code I've been writing ever since .NET 2, all in multiple libraries, and including one for benchmarking and including one for unit testing also. So I work really hard on these assemblies, so I hope you'll go and at least check them out. And if there's something you want added, do a pull request or ask me to add it. I'm always looking for code to put in this library because I use these libraries at every single project I work on, including, they're in production right now. So I use them every day because I write them. You want to click next so I can talk about the global tool? Yep. And then also this week, I also released a brand new version of my Spargin dev tool, which has two main features right now. One is it scans your hard disk for cached and temporary files that Visual Studio and SQL Server and other programs leave lying around, which can affect development, especially debugging, and especially build issues. If you go read the article, I tell a story about, sometimes, all of a sudden, the unit tests stop working and stuff like that. And if you just run the clean feature of the Spargin dev tool, it'll be fixed magically. So I use it every day. The second feature that I use multiple times a day is the backup feature. And the backup feature, what it does is it scans your entire computer system for source code and then quickly backs it up to the cloud for you or to your local folder really quickly. And the reason I use it multiple times a day is because, I've been in this industry long enough that I lose source code. Yeah, I lose source code, whether a computer issue or an issue with GitHub or whatever crappy source control program I'm using. I, I lose source control, and I lose source, and I hate doing that, especially if I forget to check it in for a day or two. So I run this multiple times a day, especially whenever before I do anything with source control. I run this to do a backup, and it's got a turbo mode that only backs up the change files, so that runs really, really quick. I mean, under 30 seconds, I can back everything up. So I hope you go check it out. There's the link right there, and let me know if you want any features added to it. Okay, next slide. So I have a brand new article out. It's the third and final article of the three-part series I've been doing for the last 3 months called Real World Coding Issues. And this one focuses on design, diagnostics, and other common issues that I see in literally every project I'm hired to work on. And so that's why, I took a lot of time to write these 3 articles that I hope you're finding useful, because these are common thing. There's a couple things I haven't seen before, and you'll definitely read that in the third article. But most everything I've talked about in these 3 articles, I see literally in almost every single contract I'm hired to work on. So I want to kind of, uncover those and share with you all of the common things I see over and over again, especially the ones that really affect performance and memory. Because I see so many projects struggling in those 2 areas, and so I focus on that, of course, because I have a code performance book out and I have a coding standards book out. So I hope you go check it out. And that's the last one of the three-part series. Okay, next slide. There's some news this week. If you're interested in AI, it looks like Microsoft launched free courses in generative AI on LinkedIn. So if you're interested in that, they're free. So why not go check them out? If you do, and if you like them, let me know, and I'll tweet about it or something. So that's the news. All right, I want to welcome Arthur to the show. Arthur has been a software engineer for 19 years and has been working on things as exciting as analysis software for casinos and things as boring as banking websites. Hey, that's funny, Arthur. He is an advocate for talking openly about mental health and psychology in the tech world, and spends a lot of his time thinking about how we program and why we program, and the tools and structures, cultures, and the mental processes that help and hinder us from the ultimate goal of creating amazing things. So welcome, Arthur. And maybe we're now having technical issues because, oh, it's just me. So maybe, there you go.
Howdy.
How's it going?
It's going good. How about you?
I'm okay. It's been a tough week, and then my internet goes down, so oh well. How are you doing?
Tired. It wasn't a rough week at work. It's just a very busy week at work.
Yeah, I think you
we
tweeted
have
something about a tough week or something, didn't you?
That was a couple weeks ago. It was a very tough week. But
Yeah.
this last week we had our what work calls Castaways Week. So it's the week we bring in. We try to do this once a quarter, but we bring in all of the remote employees for a week. So and then we
You
have
call them castaways?
Yeah.
Lost at sea.
Well, in a lot of cases, it is folks who used to work in Omaha and then said, "Hey, I want to move to Portland, but I want to keep working here. Can I do that?" I'm like, "Sure."
Yeah. That's the great thing about, I'm very thankful that we live in an industry where it allows us to do that, right? And then not everybody has that opportunity or the ability, especially depending on what country you're in. But for the most parts, we don't need to be in the office, right? with technology the way that it is now, and especially if I think back to like the late 90s and thinking about the the lack of all of this stuff we had in the late 90s. We didn't have any of this in the late 90s, really. And now we can connect, we can share, we can do whiteboard, we can do all kinds of stuff just mobile now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so, and like I was saying at the beginning of the show, working at home for me at least allows me to concentrate so much better, and my last few full-time gigs have just been worked out, just because the distractions and the lighting and the recirculated air, and it was not every morning when I would go into the office, as soon as I hit the front door, I would feel this like something come over my entire body going, oh, I've got to spend 8 hours here.
Yeah, I get that. Well, luckily I don't get that at my current job, but my current job is very much an idiosyncratic space, and we're encouraged to kind of make it our own. So I have a bunch of Lego up over my cube. Like I do have a cube, but it's got tons of stuff just all over it. It's very clearly my cube. Big poster of cognitive biases hanging out front. Like,
yeah, I used to do that when I worked up the street from where I live now. I used to have all my stuff and my lava lamp, and and I don't know about you, but I always had lava lamps because it helped me de-stress a bit. Whenever I was stressed out, I would just look at that thing for a little bit, and it would like de-stress me a bit, and I could go back to work. Plus they look cool, and it reminds me of my childhood when they were like all the rage, back then. So, what do you want to talk about today about mental health at work? Oh, and before I forget, Simon, I can't see the chat, so if there's any questions, just put them up on the screen, and we'll get Arthur to talk to them. But yeah, I can't really see the chat. So if people are chatting or talking or saying hi in the chat, hi everybody. Sorry, I can't. It's not much fun running the show from an iPhone. I can say that.
It's possible, but it's not always enjoyable.
It's possible, but I can barely see you. I can't see the chat. I can't run my slide deck. So it's a good video camera, I guess.
Well, okay, so let's leave it open it there. Like, definitely, if people have questions about how to, well, really anything as far as mental health at work, because there's a couple different broad topics, right? The first of which is kind of what we were starting to talk about, like how do you maintain your mental health at work? Like how do you prevent yourself from being driven functionally insane by, endless beige corridors. And I did a contracting stint once with a place that had this beautiful new building and just these huge open areas completely filled with these 3/4 height cubes. They were terrible. But worse was,
I hate those.
My leg often jiggles when I'm thinking, and this place had no pillars. Like it was a central quarter and then the outside. So I remember I had my headphones on and I was just kind of jiggling my leg and thinking through some coding problem, and I noticed that like two women, like two aisles over, 2 cube aisles over, like, is there an earthquake happening? Like everything on my desk is shaking. So definitely, like, we could talk about, if people are interested, the environment and how that can shape your maintaining your mental health. But where I kind of want to start is a misconception, or not misconception, but I guess a mismodeling is probably the best term of what we tend to think about with mental health at work. So well, I guess let me say this first because it's actually important. I am not a licensed therapist. I'm not a licensed psychiatrist. I'm not a licensed anything.
Me neither.
I'm a software engineer, but I've had a long personal history and basically my entire life has been spent grappling with my own mental health challenges.
Mm.
So I have a lot of lived experience around this, and I've been working. Oh dear God, it was 19 years in May, or in March rather. I've been working professionally as a software developer for 19
Mm.
years. So
Mm.
next year it will be 20, and I will immediately turn to dust. But the
No, you won't.
I
I'm
know,
way over 20, so.
but it's we have a misconception because there's definitely a question of, okay, how do I, as a person who is neurodivergent or somebody with a diagnosis, however you want to conceptualize it, how do you engage with work in a way that is not extremely stressful? Because I mean, okay, so part of the problem of mental health stuff is that it is a disability, right?
Mhm.
And I think that term is not, certainly in the public sphere, in the popular culture, it is misunderstood. A
Mm.
disability isn't necessarily something that is internal to me. There's this
Right.
thing called the social model of disability, where the disability lies in the difference between my capabilities and what is expected.
Mm.
So a good example of this is if you are a wheelchair user and you're in an environment with no curb cuts, none of those things that where the pavement goes down to meet the street
Mm.
grade, so you get up
Mm.
on a sidewalk. You are extremely limited. You're effectively locked onto the sidewalks. You can't cross streets, etc., because the effort level is
It's
significant.
great. Yeah. Yeah.
But that's an environmental thing. That has nothing to do with the capabilities of you to go that far or to move. It is that the environment expects you to be able to make that step, but you don't have to. And this leads into a whole bunch of things about universal design, right? And that
Mm.
matters a ton in software about if you're designing for experiences that allow more people to engage with your experience, like a curb cut, for instance, is the perfect example because a curb cut doesn't just help somebody with a wheelchair. It helps mothers with strollers, fathers with strollers. It
Mhm.
helps people with shopping carts. It helps
Mhm.
people like me who are idiots and go, wandering around downtown Stockholm or Chicago or wherever with luggage trying to get to our hotels. Like those, all of those things are experiences that couldn't happen easily without curb cuts.
Mhm.
So when you start talking about mental health in the context of the workplace, you have to recognize that it isn't necessarily a question of I'm not measuring up. It is a question of the standard does not mesh with my capabilities.
Right.
And that becomes a difficult conversation because you're not typically, as an employee, you're not typically the one with power in that scenario, right?
Right.
So when the requirements are things like, hey, you need to fill out, and thank God my work does not currently do this, but like you need to track your time to the nearest 15 minutes across like 17 different charge codes,
Oh, I
like
hate
total
that.
time accounting nonsense. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I mean, I do have to track my time to the 15 minutes, but that's for governmental recording shit. But that's more of, I have one charge code to go on. So I really just have to track.
Mm.
And then it becomes a question of, okay, well, how much is that? How flexible is that? Do I have to do it every day? How do I remember to do it every day if it is mandatory? Spoilers, I do not remember to do it every day.
Yeah.
And it's been a long conversation with folks. I mean, and I understand their perspective personally, like, because it's not always just bureaucratic nonsense, right? They
Mm.
use those daily burn down reports and things to do things like, can we hire somebody? Are we going to be able to have the money left at the end of the month to actually do this thing that we want to do?
Yeah.
Like I was mentioning in the Castaways week we just did, like all of that is, are we going to have enough money to pull people in and have them all go out bowling? Like that was the thing we
Yeah.
did. To be able to do those kind of predictions, I totally understand that they need those things. And it's been a long road of trying to make them understand that it isn't that I don't want to do this.
Mm.
If I could do it every day, I would absolutely do it because I
Sure.
understand that it does hurt them. But if I could make my brain work like that, then frankly, most of my life would have been extremely a lot easier.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
they also, I mean, I've been through this. Like when you were talking about that, I was remembering back to a couple of years ago when I was working at Verizon, and it was when my micromanaging boss came to me and wanted me to fill out my time in a fourth place. I said, no, sorry, I'm not doing it. I'm already doing it three places. You want me to add another one? Come on.
Wow.
That's just retarded. I'm not going to do. I refuse to do it. I said, no. Maybe that's why they didn't renew my contract, but that's just so I understand. I think most any intelligent person understands why the company's doing that, but I think the company also needs to understand that, we feel that's a complete waste of our time and they need to make it really easy for us, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
And not do it in three or four different places, right? One place.
Right. Every so often we will have to do it twice, once for the client
Yeah.
and once for us.
Yeah.
But that's kind of an extreme, and everybody knows that is a terrible situation and we work very hard to avoid it. Four sounds like, yeah, I think at three, I would basically be like, nah, because I might as well just tell you now, no, because it's not going to happen anyway. And I'd rather tell you up front and get in trouble up front than like have several months of the weird back and forth of like, well, why aren't you filling this out? Oh, I forgot. Well, why didn't you set a reminder? I did, and I instantly dismissed them because that's how my brain works.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it kind of talks about, it goes into a little bit what we talked about last time with naive realism, where people kind of make an understanding and assumption that their brain works a certain way, and so that's the way that all brains work, and that
Right.
they can do a thing, so why can't somebody do a thing?
Mhm.
And some of that turns into a thing about visibility. How especially with a mental health thing, they are often invisible disorders, invisible
Yes.
disabilities,
Yeah.
until suddenly they're very visible through behavior. But most of the
Yeah.
time, what people will do is assume that behavior is because of intrinsic attributes and not really because of something happening to you. So they will assume, oh, you just don't care, or you're just lazy, you can't get it done.
Mhm.
That's not what's going on there.
Yeah.
So it's talking about that in a workplace context is really difficult, right? Especially in the United States, but it's true in other countries as well, depending on their individual laws. Because once, as a manager, you start saying words like clinical depression or ADHD or autism, every HR professional in the building, like their sonar will go off, and they'll all be like, "Something's wrong is happening."
Yeah.
Because I mean, especially HR is there to protect the company, and having those
Sure.
conversations starts to be, especially in those terms, starts to be really problematic.
Mhm.
So what I advocate is using a difference between what I call clinical language versus what's called experiential language. So clinical language is that language of diagnosis, is that language of psychiatry and psychology. Um, the one of the cute examples you can do to differentiate this is you can talk about a patient who presents with acute extreme post-traumatic stress disorder, um, as a result of extraordinarily traumatic instances during his childhood and a removal from his typical family environs, removal of parental figures, um, a what is the word, like, what is the other different terms? He's develops an obsessive compulsive disorder towards order, towards lawfulness, um, and spends a significant amount of time deferring his anger and his pain into maladaptive antisocial behaviors,
Mhm.
um, explicitly develops an alter persona to engage with what he feels like is the um, unfortunate or the unreal world that he has to engage with on a regular basis. And
Yeah.
you can go on at length about this guy, or you could say that Bruce Wayne had his parents murdered in front of him as a small child in an alleyway by, well, depending on which canon you're looking at, right? Whoever it was that murdered him,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and decided to take that anger and fear and use it to fuel him to become the Batman.
Right.
Those are two very different stories when you start talking about them, because one of them is all about the language of effectively disability, of something that is happening to Bruce Wayne, and not what Bruce Wayne is doing to enact change. Now, of course, the metaphor falls apart because, Batman's not exactly the most pro-social superhero in the planet.
No, it's
Certainly
not.
not
Kind of violent.
Yeah, certainly some weird, aspects as far as that, once you dig into that piece. But
Sure.
where I was going with that, though, is like you can have that same kind of distinction at work. And instead of talking about, hey, my ADHD was acting up and I just completely spaced this, or, my executive function was unable to appropriately address this in time. Thank you for allowing me the extra, or, walking in and having to think about like, well, why didn't you get this done? Was it your ADHD again? Like, those are all very clinical and problematic discussions, right?
Yeah.
Instead, you turn around and use experiential language. I say things like, look, I really want to submit these timesheets on time. I can't. I've tried reminders. I've tried multiple reminders. I've tried physical Post-it notes, and they work for about 3 days, and then they just don't work. And I know, like, our HR person has said, like, well, you remember to brush your teeth every day. And I'm like, not actually. Like, because one of the things about the ADHD brain is that it does not build habits the way that other brains build habits. And that's arguably, and I'm going to butcher the science as far as I understand it, about the dopamine pathway that exists. Like, our brains thrive on novelty instead of on routine. And so they're novelty seeking. And so that means that I can maintain a habit for about 3 weeks and then it just kind of stops. It's really, like, I can almost set a watch by it.
Because I think they say you have to do it for at least a month or 6 weeks or something before it gets ingrained into your mind, right?
Right. Well, it is about
for a normal person, right? Not somebody.
It is just about the point where everybody else would develop a habit. My brain is just like, okay, we're done with that now. It's really frustrating. But I can talk about what it's like for me to have that experience. And then she can turn around and talk about her experience. When you don't do this, this is what happens. These are the consequences and the outcomes of it. And at that point, we're not talking medically. We're talking in terms of outcomes. We're talking in terms of effects on both of us. And that makes it a lot easier to try and find some kind of middle ground, to turn into a moment of like, okay, well, I know I'm going to get a ping every so often. And it's like, can you just fill out your timesheet? And I'll go do it right then because it's easier to do it right then. And we'll try and keep in sync. And some days I'm going to manage it and some days I'm not. And she understands that enough because she knows that it's not about willfulness to not do it. She knows that it's about the narrative, like about my experience, right? And what's fascinating about that is once you start having those conversations, it actually opens up a flood of other conversations because we can't just leave emotions at the door of work, right? I mean, like, I've actually started using that particular metaphor before the show Severance came out. And now I can just point to Severance and go, like, that's not what happens. I mean, thankfully, right? I don't know if you've seen it.
I liked it.
For those who haven't, it's a show about where they've got like a brain implant where they basically excise your memory of everything that happens at work. And you go into work, you're a different person and you do all these things. And so there's like this drama about what's going on at work versus like their lives, et cetera. And of course things start to break down because it's that sort of show. But, in some ways it would be so much easier if it was just, okay, I can leave all of the nonsense that's happening in my personal life outside. I can't. Nobody can.
It's unrealistic for anybody to do that, right? Or to expect somebody to do that,
right? And I mean, some of that comes into a question, like turns into the question of privilege. Like, if you want to see a way that privilege manifests in the world, having the ability to defer things that might be otherwise consuming your brain to other people, like for instance having a stay-at-home spouse. And again,
Or an
typically
assistant.
right, having the
Yeah.
money and the time to go find a personal assistant to like, that is a thing that is privilege. And it's a manifestation of it, because it means that I don't have to have that, oh, is this thing going to get done? What am I going to do for dinner?
Right.
Because I have, I have enough money. Well, I don't, but if you did, to like go for HelloFresh or one of those meal kit services that'll deliver a almost cooked, pre-cut thing to your door.
Yeah.
That's privilege. And I don't mean you shouldn't make use of it, right? I'm more just trying to demonstrate it, that that's a instance where there are things that some people might go, well, I don't have a problem leaving everything at the door. And I'm like, well, maybe you're deferring it. Maybe you're using other people or using status and money not incorrectly to deal with some of those things, right? I have coworkers who are like, why do you still mow your lawn? You could just pay somebody for it. And I'm like, well, one, I'm still paying off my student loans. Two, it's really good thinking time for me and
Yeah, you
podcasting.
might like it. I used to love mowing my lawn when I had one. I look forward to doing that kind of stuff. I like working in the yard and doing those kind of things. Yeah.
But where I was going with that is, like, you can't leave all of that at the door of work, even if you have some degree of privilege to deal with this stuff. There are what Donald Norman calls affective experiences, which is to say an emotional experience that are just going to consume you. So, for instance, your parents dying or being very ill, your partner being very ill, your kids having medical problems. Not even just medical problems, but I mean, like, okay, my child is now, I don't have a child, but if I did have one and they were like at that age where they're graduating from constant preschool to like, okay, now we got to figure out the school scenario and daycare after school. How does that work? And like, you have to book daycare 3 years in advance, basically, from what I'm hearing from all of my coworkers. Like, how do you manage that? That's a bunch of stress and effort that you have to have on top of everything you got to do at your job.
Yeah. Well,
So,
I just, speaking of children, I just saw in the news this morning that, the current money value they're giving at, average to raise a kid in America is $250,000 now. And so,
good Lord.
just think about that. I have two kids, my daughter has three, but, just think of just how much stress it put a lot of stress on me when I was, when I was married and the kids were living with me. I worked three jobs. I worked, I worked from sun up to sundown, because
Hmm.
I was the only income, earner in the house. And so it was up to me to make money for four people. And so, that also, creates a lot of stress and mental anxiety and things like that.
Exactly. But the
Yeah.
thing is once we start talking experientially, we can make those experiences be the same kind of conversation as a conversation about something that is diagnosable.
Right.
That's the fun part. I mean, not fun part, but that's the powerful part. It's the part where we can turn around and say, okay, I know that I'm not going to be all here today because I'm dealing with something else. So I know that I'm gonna need something low key, like writing unit tests or going out and fixing a bunch of particular like vulnerabilities or code styling issues or whatever. Something I can just crank through and not think about too hard. That's what I'm gonna need today.
Yeah. And
Being able to, yeah,
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
being able to be open about that actually
Mhm.
lets your team plan better. That's the really cool part. You can say up front, like I literally had this experience in November. My cat got diagnosed with cancer. I'm not sure it's cancer now, but he's still not doing great.
Mhm.
Um,
Sorry
and
to hear that.
yeah, I mean, it hit me harder than I expected.
Yeah.
Which is another thing that, we often underestimate the effects of emotions, or how emotions will affect us, right? We think about our future and say, well, when this thing happens to me, I'll be okay or whatever. Um, but it definitely was a couple weeks of like, I am not, there's a almost like I try to go access a part of my brain and the brain's just like, nah, that's
Hmm.
taken up right now, thinking about the cat.
Yeah.
Um, So you're just not going to be able to think. And so I had a day or two, and then I had to sit down with my teammates, and I'm like, look, I'm not here right now. I'm elsewhere processing this, so I'm not going to be as responsive. I'm not going to be as insightful. I'm not going to be as creative. I'm not going to be as productive.
Mhm.
Um, and I let
And
them
that's
know. Go ahead.
and that's that's one thing that I've been doing more lately, and I don't know if I necessarily tell the entire team I'm working with. But I definitely usually tell my manager that, look, I suffer from migraines, and so I'll say I'll be here today, but I'm not going to be like super productive because I'm in agony. But at least
Mm.
I can get some things done, kind of like what you were talking about, things I don't have to think too hard about, right? And that also is one of the reasons why I do like working at home, because it allows me to I'm not sure the right word. The only words coming out, which I'm not sure is right, is cover up, these lulls in
Mm.
my thinking or my productivity, because, of, migraine or something else going on, that, I don't want to just take a day off, but I don't want to tell everybody either. Right. So, yeah.
And
And
that's
I think, telling somebody is, at least to me, is beneficial, because at least they understand, okay, Dave's going through this, and we'll get back at him tomorrow or something like that, right? And
yeah, right.
uh, but
Well,
but the thing
it's
is, you have to
a
say it in the right way, and you have to be around the right team that accepts it, right?
yes,
Yeah.
and it does require a manager who's understanding. And
Mhm.
the key that I think is important is understanding. Okay, if you're being able to structure, for instance, the work you're doing, so you can do that. So you can lump all of these boring tasks, that thinking, non-thinky tasks on the same day, as
Yeah.
opposed to, oh, well, you have to work these tickets in order. You must follow capital S Scrum, kind of thing. Flexibility, I think, is the watchword in a lot of that, especially when it comes
Mhm.
down to, uh, children and managing all of the nonsense that comes along with that. But flexibility in general, I think that's one of the things that people are really fighting against when people start talking about going back into the office, is the loss of flexibility, like you were describing.
Yeah.
Um, so I think you were correct. You're 100% correct. You absolutely, it's crucial to tell somebody, because your
Mhm.
manager is going to see the behavior, right?
Mhm.
And then they're just going to make up a story about it. And I
Right.
guarantee it's going to be worse than whatever story you're giving them. That's the thing I have to tell people. Like, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter if your story is, I do have a diagnosed problem, and I'm grappling with these issues. Um, it's better than what's they're thinking, because they're going to be thinking, well, this person's a bad worker, or they're
Mhm.
lazy, or they're not
Right.
a good
Right.
developer. Um, and at least providing that story to your manager, whoever is your immediate supervisor, can help mitigate that. Now, to your point, they do have to be accepting of that, and I have
Mhm.
known people who've had managers who were not willing to work with that person for a long
Mhm.
time. To be fair, let's be fair to managers. A lot of them are overworked. A lot of them have too many people to manage on like in any reasonable
Yes.
basis. They can't be
Way
human
too
with
many
all of them.
people. Yeah.
Right. So when it comes down, a lot of them don't have the time or ability to effectively, or training to effectively actually teach people in the first place. Um, but once you start having that conversation, you can have if you're having it experientially, you can have a conversation about the consequences and say, okay, I understand where you're coming from. The outcome is not what I'm looking for. So what can we do that you can do that will
Mhm.
change this outcome, that will arrive at a goal that, because people wander into these conversations and they have a goal, right? Your manager's goal is typically meeting their metrics, their KPIs, getting software out the door,
Mhm.
whatever it takes to look good to their boss, because that's how most people work in a power
Right.
hierarchy, right?
Right.
And that's not, we can have a discussion later about like whether the world should be that way, but that is the way the world is.
Mhm.
And they have this then tendency to want to just get those things done. And what happens is that they come into these conversations where they start talking about, say, your performance, and they have a position. And a position is how they envision getting to the goal.
Mm.
Your job in this conversation is to understand what their position is and what their goal is, because it's really difficult to change somebody's goal. It's way easier to change their position.
Mm-hmm.
And you can change their position so that it overlaps with your goal, so that you can hit both
Right.
goals with the same position. For instance, an easy way to do that is to start talking about the behaviors and the outcomes. Like, for instance, one of the examples I use in one of my talks is somebody who says, "Hey, I get, before these big meetings with bosses, C-levels and whatever, I get really anxious and nervous about saying anything wrong. So I spend like an hour just kind of thinking about all the questions they could possibly ask me. So I'm not very responsive in like the hour before one of these meetings."
Yeah.
And that can be behavior that's not okay, right?
Mm.
That it's okay for that behavior to not be acceptable. That is what this person's going through, and the emotional affective experience they're having is real, and it's not bad for them to have it necessarily, but the behavior can be not okay.
Right.
And so it becomes, if you're a good manager, it becomes the question of, okay, well, how can we work with you to accommodate this? What can we do? Whether that's making sure that there's a very clear agenda, whether that's making sure that you're not going to be asked questions, or unless they're like questions that people have up front, or getting people to pre-submit their questions
Mm.
to meetings, etc. Those are all things you could potentially work for with this person to like create and to accommodate them. Right? Really, it's to
Right.
accommodate them as a human.
I
Yeah.
I did have one question before I forget and before we run out of time, because we're already getting short. I can't believe it already. So how long have you been working at Avature?
It was 9 years in March, actually.
So since it's been a really long time since I've worked full time at a company, so I'm not super aware of what companies do these days. Um, how much does your company recognize, the mental health challenges of the employees, and do they provide anything, services to you besides just, oh yeah, you can call that number on the insurance card? Do they do anything more than that?
Um, a lot of places are offering wellness style plans now, or they some of them will offer, and ours does as well, like an employee crisis line. You
I
have to
mean,
be
do
really.
they do like anything proactively, like
Mhm.
with all the employees, right? Like
They've
have
done like wellness things of like, okay,
yeah,
here's somebody's going to come in and teach meditation, that kind of stuff. But it's
yeah,
a lot of the time I don't like those,
mm,
because they are, honestly, anything that involves the word wellness is bound to just make me angry, because usually what that means is that um,
they're
this is a
gonna fix
company.
you. Yeah.
Well, it's a service that has, it's not just they're going to fix you. It is, in a lot of cases, wellness things will teach you a skill and then say, well, you have to do that skill to maintain your own mental health. And now
Mm,
suddenly all of the burden of your mental health is on you.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
none of the situational things that drive a lot of those behaviors, like you talk about the rising rates of anxiety and depression in children. And it's like, but yeah, well, we have an incredibly terrifying world that we're about to hand to these kids. I completely understand why they might be depressed. Like, and we're like, well, it's the social medias. It's like, maybe not, like maybe, but maybe not.
It's
And
definitely, I would say social media, the cell phone, everything, it's definitely contributing to that, because
it actually
I could say
really,
I was just about to say that I am so glad that I raised my kids before all that was popular, you know, uh,
it actually, if you go to
because,
the science, it actually depends.
huh?
Um,
Yeah.
it's not as clear cut as a lot of people like it to believe.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, just all
because
the pressures on kids these days, I think, is greater than it was like when I was raising my kids, right? And I feel that's the way it is. But
I think they're more visible.
yeah, yeah.
Because I grew up, I was a senior in high school, um, well, I guess no, we got internet in 1995, but I wasn't really like online until 1997, 1998. And that, so like it wasn't really a fundamental part of my growing up.
Mhm.
There were a ton of pressures growing up. I think it's,
Yeah.
social pressures, conformity pressures, all of that nonsense are all real. It's just a question of the avenues by which they're conveyed. And I think they're more visible to parents now than they were, because a lot of those things happened in uh, spaces where parents were included.
Mhm.
Whether that was Boy Scouts, whether that was, I mean, and parents are included in that, but trust me, there's places in Boy Scouts that the leaders aren't there, et cetera, or at least there was.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think honestly, the biggest thing you can do is flexibility. That's one of the major things you can start doing to help your employees' mental health. Allowing flex time, allowing hybrid work, allowing them to, I mean, and even
Yes.
before the pandemic, I was, where I worked, they let us, oh, I'm going to work from home today because I'm going to have somebody out to check my air conditioner today. And I'm just going to work from home the whole day, and nobody batted an eye. Or like, I'm kind of sick today, but I'm not super sick, so I'm just going to work from home today.
Right. Because you shouldn't go to work sick. I'm sorry,
No.
especially when you have something communicable.
Straight up.
I can't. Yeah, if you have a cold or COVID, yeah, don't go to work. But people do, because they're not. I remember, the last major full-time job I had, I went to my boss multiple times and said, you need to send that guy home because he's going to get this whole floor sick. And since hourly people don't get unlimited sick time like I had, they work through their sicknesses, right? And then that gets everybody else sick, and just, Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, that's one of the big major failures of not having guaranteed sick time in this country for everybody, right?
Yeah.
But that's what I mean about, like, there are systemic things that need to change really to drive some of this stuff, and creating a wellness program inside of a company isn't going to hurt, but it isn't going to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to feel like, oh, well, we've taught everybody to meditate, job done, right? Like,
Yeah,
no,
doesn't work like that. Yeah.
I mean, in a lot of it, where it could be fostering emotional connections at work as well. And so this, I want to tie back to a thing you were mentioning about, you don't necessarily want to tell your team that you're having migraines.
Right.
And I want to push back on that slightly, because trust me, I understand. The responses I've gotten being more open about my mental health challenges have been pretty unilaterally positive.
That's good.
And I don't want to say I'm going to be not everybody's going to have my experience. I mean, I've literally talked with somebody. It's literally the first time I gave a talk on mental health, I spoke with the guy, and he came up and he said, basically, like abridged, he said, yeah, my wife does not believe that mental illness is a thing, and my boss doesn't believe that mental illness is a thing. I'm just like, Jesus,
wow,
dude. Like,
there's two people you have to leave right now.
Yeah, it's basically like kind of where I went. But it was a lot.
Yeah.
I did, because it was, was not quite aware that I was putting myself up for those level of conversations immediately. I was expecting them eventually, but it was immediately out of the gate. Anyhow, I know that it's difficult to do those conversations, and I know that it's difficult to be vulnerable, but being vulnerable with your team is crucial to opening the door for them to be vulnerable with you. If you actually want to have them understand what it is like to be you, it really helps if you understand what it's like to be them.
Yes.
And even just discussing emotional aspects of things in the context of your work, whether those are transitory things, like, for instance, hey, I'm angry about this outage that we had. I think that there was a flaw. I think there was a failure, and I think it was your fault. Like, that's an emotion you're having. You obviously don't want to necessarily have that in a confrontational manner,
Sure.
but addressing that emotion is critical, because otherwise it can fester. Otherwise it can sit there, and now you think this person is an idiot at their job. Maybe they missed it because there's any number of reasons why they could have missed it. And you can train yourself to think up, okay, what are the other reasons they could have missed this thing? What are the stories that I can come up with? And see that there are a lot of them. But you could also just have the conversation and say, I'm upset about this. What happened? I want to understand. And framing it in terms of that experience, in terms of, I'm having an experience where I'm angry. Why don't you help me understand the experience that got us to this point? Because I don't want to be angry. Because I don't want to be angry at you, because I'm gonna have to work with you for the next 2 years, or whatever the timeline on that particular thing is. Framing that and opening those things up can make for a more emotional connection with the people you work with, which actually can also drastically increase your mental health, because you have a positive connection with these people at that point, and it isn't simply how you doing today? I'm living the dream.
Yeah, that's
you can actually go ahead.
Yeah, that's, I've been thinking while you've been talking, I've been thinking a lot about, I think at work, we're two people, right? We're the work person, but we're ourselves, right? And depending where you're working and, what's going on, a lot of people might not even know your other self than the work self, right? And one of the situations, that I was thinking about was, like, I was working at this one company, and I don't know if it was one or multiple people, but there's definitely this one person I just thought was a real big pain in the ass. Every time I dealt with this person, it was difficult, right? And I just thought they were a mean, nasty person, right? And then at the Christmas party, I discovered they're actually a normal person. They're just mean and nasty at work. So, but now I can see, oh, okay, she is kind of a normal person too, along with this other stuff. And at least for me, these kinds of, I'm not saying you should go out and drink with your teammates or anything, but getting to know them personally, whether that's through activities or team building or something like that. Like one time I ran a team building thing for a company I worked here, and the next day after the team building event, I noticed a change in the team positively, right? Because we all spent most of the day together having fun, having food, bowling, winning goofy prizes and all these things. And I noticed a change the next day, well, the next Monday when everybody came back in. And I was going, wow, that really does work, right? And I don't see people doing that anymore. And I think that's a mistake that companies make, that we have to work, 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 and that's it, and go home. And like you were saying, kind of going around back to what you were saying at the very beginning is we're supposed to leave everything at the door, but we can't, right? Yeah, it's impossible.
Yeah, and being open with your colleagues, like you describe the work self and the other self, right? I mean, and that's in the mental health space, that gets called masking. You are, I mean, and it happens a ton for folks who are on the autism spectrum. They have to, and it's definitely true for folks who have diagnosed with ADHD as well. Like, you have to sometimes slow down and be like, okay, I know I can't, like, yes, this person is into the thing I am into. You can't always just turn on the fire hose and be like, okay, I'm really freaking excited about this, and I'm into this too, because sometimes other people are like, holy crap, what do you like? They're not ready for the like intensity that you're necessarily going to put into it.
Yeah.
And I think that masking is stressful, and it takes cognitive energy, and it
does.
sucks energy and load and time away from being creative and being interesting and doing interesting and exciting things.
Yes.
So
I agree.
Trying to, I mean, there's obviously some parts of your life you probably don't want to bring into work.
Sure.
Things like your dating life, probably not great workplace conversation for a large number of reasons.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are, the more you can try to integrate those two selves, the more you can wipe away that kind of severance mentality of I am this person at work and I am this person outside of work. Now that I know we're running late, but real quick, like there is always going to be some degree of difference, right? Because humans do behave situationally, and who you are in a social situation is not who you are in a work situation. But I think, like the point you were making about the coworker, that can actually be enlightening. Why does she behave this way in a work context? Is it because she feel? I mean, and I'm completely spitballing, but one of the easy things that my brain comes up with is, okay, well, she could be defending her power. She could feel like she is under threat from external, people in the organization, whether those are named or just kind of notional. And she has to behave this way because that's the expectation she thinks. And that's how she thinks she will maintain her control in whatever her domain happens to be. Right. And that then turns into a conversation you can have if you feel like having that conversation about, look, I'm not here to take anything away from you. I just want this done, and I want you to help me do it because I need you to help me do it. Like you can turn around and make her feel, if that is her particular thing, right? You can turn around and say, I need you to be part of this with me because I can't do it on my own. Now she has the power still, right?
Yeah. That's really great advice. And yeah, we're 1 minute over, and I want to let Simon go to bed. So, especially since he's in a hotel today, or I don't know where he is. So I really have enjoyed this conversation, and I've gotten more questions for you than maybe any other guest, because like there's all these other questions I want to ask you, but unfortunately we're around out of time. So we're going to have you come back on, and just to talk about this subject, because I'm not done. So I still have questions, or questions on how to help other people. Like the one question I put on the list that we didn't get to is what are the extra challenges or whatever, mental health when you do work from home. There are extra challenges. I mean, I did allude that things can be better, but there's also other challenges too. The disconnection from your coworkers is really difficult for me, at least. And especially when I join teams I never meet, and like that's why I think and I know some companies do this when they do bring everybody remotely in once or twice a year, to at least be around each other, right? And that's the way you get to know these kind of things we've been talking about this hour. So I do have to let you go, unfortunately, but I do want to ask you one question at least, because I asked you a different one last time, and that is, what brings you happiness in your tech career besides income? I don't know if income makes you happy, but what brings you happiness in your tech career?
Honestly, I think it is showing people that it is not just about tech. The tech is a tool, and it's a means to an end, and it should be about the people, whether that's the users, whether that's the people building it, or whether that's the people that are paying for it.
Yes, I agree. That's an awesome answer. I really like that one, because it is about the people, right? And we usually just focus on what we see as far as the software or whatever, right? We don't see the people, right? And because I've said this over and over again. I've worked with a couple really awesome teams in my career, and man, just working at those jobs so much. It's so. I mean, I'm not saying there's no difficulties and there's no stress and there's no anxiety, but just working with a great team that works well together is worth its weight in gold to me.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Well, I've got to let you go. I think you probably have to still do the slides. I've got a couple of slides, and you want to hang out afterwards.
Sure thing.
Are you doing the slides, or is Simon doing them?
I was doing them.
Okay. So we got a couple more to go.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. I'll definitely have you back on as soon as I can get it scheduled. Maybe early next year. Have you back on.
Yeah. All right, let me get this going.
All right, awesome. And thanks so much for being on the show. And I hope you have a great weekend. And then I hope the weather gets better. And
Yeah.
well, I should say that for all of America, except for San Diego. It's all crappy weather right now. All right. Well, thanks a lot. I'll see you
Thank
next
you.
time. All right. That was a wonderful conversation with Arthur. And like I said, I'm genuine when I say when I have somebody back on the show. And I think this is a subject that, we kind of alluded to isn't talked enough, and it definitely isn't handled enough or handled well enough in software engineering companies. So I'm glad I had Arthur come back on, and I'm looking forward to him coming back. So you want to do the next slide? I want to give a shout out to my friends in the Ukraine. They're still dealing with that war, and it doesn't look like it's going to be over anytime soon. So please think about our friends in the Ukraine and everything they're going through, and give them your support if you can. All right, next slide. As always, I hope you will help me help the kids from the slums in Delhi, India, by donating to any of those links there. This is video from when I was there last October, and we delivered 5 computers to them and saw the kids, and I was able to catch up with Dave and Chandy on just the wonderful work they've been doing with these kids from the slums in Delhi, India. So we as software engineers have the ability to give. It's just you've got to click on your computer and do it. So please use one of those links, or just go to the Voice of Slum and buy them stuff, which I'm going to end up doing pretty soon before I go to Denmark. And because I do support them besides my time, as I do buy other stuff for them too. Okay. Next slide, last slide. Like I said at the beginning of the show, August 12th, I'm going to have Robert back on the show, Robert Bogue. We're going to be talking about imposter syndrome, something that a lot of us struggle with, including myself. And so I'm really looking forward to that show. 2 back-to-back kind of like mental health shows. I'm glad I can get these experts on the show to talk to you all. So that's coming up in next week, and then after that, I'll be off until September, because the weekend after that, I'm going to Arizona for my brother and his wife's wedding renewal, and then the weekend after that, I'm going to Denmark for the first time to speak at the Copenhagen's Developer Festival. I'm really excited about that because I've never spoken in Europe. And all right, click again there, Arthur. As always, I hope you will help me help your fellow human being by going and donating blood this weekend. All the blood banks are in a shortage right now. I got an email yesterday from my blood bank, and they sent some of my blood up to Los Angeles to help people. So that made me feel good, because I'm just not helping people in here in San Diego. I'm also helping people in other cities. And so I go and do my monthly donation, where I had to sit on a machine for 2 hours and get blood sucked in and out of me, and that's a whole ordeal. But all you have to do is give 30 minutes of your time, and that can help up to, I think, 3 people. And also, I think you burn 1,000 calories or something like that, and you get out of work for 24 hours. I mean, physical work. So you don't have to do lawn work or anything like that. So please donate blood. I'll never stop talking about that. And also, click one more time. Thanks everybody for watching the show. Sorry, went a little bit over, but this is a really important subject, and so I want to hear from you. Who you want me to invite on the show, if you have any comments for the show, whatever else you want to talk to me about, please email me at rockinthecodeworld@csharpcorner.com. With that, I'll see you next week.